Kristen Atchison here, and we're going to finish up the development through the lifespan lecture. So we've already covered prenatal development, we've already covered cognitive development with infants and children, and now we're moving on to social development. So attachment is the strong, affectionate tie we have with special people. So if you think about who do you go to for comfort, that's somebody that you have an attachment to. And the idea behind attachment theory is that we form these attachments really, really early on in our lives, and these serve as a blueprint for our later relationships. So the attachments we have with our caregivers when we're really young really affect our attachments to friends and romantic partners later on in life. We start this kind of attachment theory and this attachment lecture with some older work that was done by Harlow with monkeys. So
newborn rhesus monkeys will grow up not in accordance with nature, but in the controlled atmosphere of a laboratory, where all the psychological influences of childhood can be duplicated. In a classic continuing study, infant monkeys are removed from the mother at birth and raised in semi-isolation. Other individuals can be seen and heard, but there is no physical contact, no interaction. Mother is a bit of plastic and shaggy cloth, a doll with no life of its own, but capable of nourishing the life of an infant. The monkey will come to depend upon this doll to satisfy basic necessities of life. Not only nourishment, but a deeper psychological need for comfort and security. In primate infants, there is an instinctive need to cling to another body, soft and warm. Food or security, which is motherhood's stronger appeal? Alongside a warm, familiar mother of cloth is a stark wire doll set up as nothing more than a feeding machine. The young monkey is placed deliberately on a cloth mother which has no milk to nourish him, but fulfills some fundamental needs. This experiment revolves around one simple question. Will the infant monkey switch his affection to a wire mother which offers food and life itself? Only when forced by hunger does he loosen his grip and begin to yield to nature's most powerful internal drive. From the wire mother, he derives one thing, nourishment. No warmth, no comfort, no feeling of security. After feeding, he returns to spend up to 22 hours a day near the only mother he knows. From this inanimate object, the infant derives all the security and mother love he needs. He can, if also exposed early to other young, grow into a normal, well-adjusted adult.
So as you saw, the monkey still really preferred the cloth mother, even when the wire mother was providing sustenance, okay? So we know that attachment is more than just nourishment, is more than just kind of these needs, these physical needs, that it really involves more of this, this relationship, this aspect of comfort, this aspect of who do we go to when we need comforting, who do we go to when we're distressed, these sorts of things. Bowlby kind of took this information and he developed the ethological theory of attachment. And the primary assumption is that all species are born with species-typical behavior that promote these social environments. So monkeys cling. They cling to their mother. That is a species-typical behavior that promotes this social interaction between mother and infant monkey. And that these innate signals are products of an evolutionary history. Our infants, human infants, can't cling to our mothers, but we do definitely have other kinds of things that are really indicative of that relationship. And that these kinds of behaviors really increase the chances of survival for the species. And so again, that these are happening across all species of animals, including ourselves, and that this attachment increases our survival by having these relationships. In humans, there's some kind of theories that infant-directed speech developed after we evolved and lost our ability to cling to our mothers, that this speech allows us to kind of have that attachment, that kind of relationship when mom is out kind of hunting, gathering, doing whatever mom or dad is doing. That these really, again, can help form those bonds, help communicate, and provide comfort and attention even when they're not directly attached. We definitely see that in humans that skin-to-skin contact is really, really important for very young infants, that this skin-to-skin contact can really calm infants down. And this is not necessarily skin-to-skin mom to baby. This can be skin-to-skin dad to baby too. So really having that time with the infant against their caregiver's skin, where the infant's skin is exposed to the parental skin, the caregiver skin, also maybe one of these kind of more humanistic behavioral tendencies. How we measure attachment in humans, this was devised through Mary Ainsworth. She kind of was the student of Bowlby's and took this information and applied it more to humans. And how we measure this is called the strange situation. And it's just that. It's a strange situation. So what happens is infants come to a lab, and it's a place that they've never been before, and there's toys that they've never seen before, and it's a series of separations and reunions from the parent. So mom's there, a researcher comes in, mom leaves, and infant's left alone with the researcher, and they monitor kind of how the infant responds to this. There's this YouTube video that I have linked here, and I will put the link on D2L for you that you can watch, where you can see this kind of the series of separations and reunions. And what they do is they measure the infant's responses to the increasing levels of stress. New person is a stressor. How does the infant respond to that? Mom leaves. That's a stress. How does the infant respond to that? Mom returns. That's a stress. How does the infant respond to that? The toy play and exploration. How they explore those things when mom is both there and when mom's not there. And those kinds of measurements give us different kind of clusters of behavior, different kind of clusters of attachment. And we have four main kinds of attachment. We have secure attachment. And these are infants who may or may not cry at these separations, but they're easily comforted by their parents. They're really secure in the fact that mom or dad is there for me when I need them, and that they're going to come back. And they're used to kind of having this reciprocity, that the infant needs something that the mother or the father provides that for that need, that caregiver is providing for the needs of the infants, both emotionally and physically. Avoidant attachment, these infants usually aren't distressed by the separation and avoid the parent when they return. This is going to be a more of an insecure attachment, so avoidant, resistant, and disorganized are all insecure attachments. And these are just different types of insecure attachment. Resistant attachment identifies infants who really remain close before the departure and are angry and resistive when they come back. So they really want that attention, but they're angry when it comes back. So again, this really is kind of a resistant relationship. And then the final one, as you would kind of guess, is going to be more disorganized. They really don't know what to expect. They aren't responding in typical patterns of behavior. because they don't know what to expect from the parent. The parent is probably has not been providing any kind of consistency in terms of their behavior. Sometimes they're going to be very responsive, sometimes they're not, sometimes. And so infants don't know how to respond. They don't understand the nature of the relationship. And so secure is really juxtaposed against these other three types: avoidant, resistant, and disorganized, these insecure attachments. We see that secure attachment really leads to really good developmental outcomes for infants and children. And we see that these infants typically who are securely attached have healthier relationships when they are adults, as opposed to insecurely attached infants who have more maladaptive outcomes and more maladaptive relationships later on in life. So here is some results from a study that looked at how infants were attached at 15 months of age. They were either securely attached or insecurely attached. And then they asked their preschool teachers when they were 3 to describe them, to describe this child. Okay, so the preschool teacher didn't know how they were attached. So this is a correlational study. They did a correlation between the attachment and the observations at preschool. And what they found was that infants who were securely attached at 15 months old at 3 years were more likely to be described as a leader, sensitive to others, popular with peers, initiating activities, eager to learn, and self-directed. All of these things are really indicative of that attachment relationship. If the caregiver is being sensitive to the child is learning that sensitivity, that kind of responsiveness. And then is because it's been modeled for them, they're going to be able to model it for others. Clearly, when you are sensitive to others, this is good, right? People want to be around you when you do that. And these kinds of behaviors. Where we see that the insecurely attached infants at 3 years are described as socially withdrawn, hesitant, and we really are seeing learning outcomes for both the secure and the insecurely attached children as well. So attachment is really kind of a component of this social kind of development. And again, the idea behind attachment theory is that it's laying this groundwork for how we are learning relationships are supposed to function, this kind of blueprint that we will kind of use to formulate our future relationships. Other kinds of social development things that are happening are child rearing styles or parenting styles. There are 4 main kinds of parenting styles, and they really vary on 2 kinds of main axes. One is about control. So the control autonomy is that axis, and the other one's kind of about acceptance and involvement. And so that's kind of the other axes. And we see that authoritative is kind of the, has the most positive outcomes. And these are parents that really are very involved and very accepting of their child. So they're very high on acceptance, high on love, high on affection. But they're also still providing a good amount of control, okay? But that control is not controlling. It's very adaptive and appropriate to the needs of the child. So children are allowed to make decisions for themselves when appropriate, but are not allowed to make all decisions. There's still a lot of control about behavior, about appropriateness, these kinds of things. What's important for those children. Authoritarian parents, they have very low acceptance. That's not necessarily low love. That's low acceptance of kind of the child for who the child is, possibly. They more have kind of an outcome of what they think that child should be, instead of kind of accepting the child that they have. That involvement can really be high or low. It kind of is dependent on the situation. These parents also exude a really high level of control, and it's not adaptive. And so they're not giving children much autonomy. So an authoritarian parent is going to, let's just say if we're talking about clothing, like what kids can wear. An authoritarian parent is going to really control that very, very closely, what you can wear, sometimes even picking out outfits for children past when that's appropriate. Whereas authoritative parents may allow more flexibility in that. I try to be authoritative parent. And so my daughter sometimes, and has consistently, since she was old enough to have an opinion about what to wear, worn some pretty crazy outfits. As long as it's weather appropriate, if she's going out in some mismatched, what I consider crazy town outfit, that I'm okay with that. If she's okay with that, that's fine. I'm trying to give her that autonomy to make decisions for herself that are really low-risk decisions, right? What you're wearing is a very low-risk decision as long as it's weather appropriate and safe. And so kind of giving her that ability to have autonomy. Authoritarian parents really aren't granting their children these kinds of autonomy. They're not allowing them to make decisions. And we find that decision making is something is very much learned. And so having these kinds of autonomous situations where they can make decisions at an appropriate level, we find is really, really beneficial for children. Permissive parents are kind of going to be the I want to be your best friend parents. They're high on acceptance. They can either be too high or too low on involvement, but they really have a low level of control. And they're giving their children too much autonomy, okay? These parents are, they are figuring it out for themselves. This kid can do this. To the extent that they're creating situations where the children are making decisions for things that they really shouldn't be making decisions on. And a 3-year-old doesn't have the capabilities to really pick a nutritionally complete meal, right? They don't know that you can't just eat, cheese crackers and it be okay. That goldfish do not qualify as a meal. And so again, permissive parents are granting too much autonomy. And so they are too low on control. And then uninvolved parents are really low across the board, okay? These are what they sound like, uninvolved. And we see that these actually have the most negative outcomes. And in very, very extreme cases of uninvolved parenting, it becomes a neglect situation. So, where we really are neglecting this child, these parent is neglecting their parental responsibilities and is neglecting the child into a clinical state. In extreme cases, uninvolved will be there. So again, the 4 of those are authoritative. That has the most positive outcomes. Authoritarian parenting, at least in Western cultures, these children tend to be more anxious, easily upset, and have low self-confidence. There is some difference on authoritarian parenting culturally. So we see in more collectivist cultures, there is a lot more authoritarian parenting. And we don't see the same level of negative outcomes that we do see authoritarian parenting in individualistic cultures. And so some of that may be kind of the authoritarian parenting is kind of juxtaposed against individualism. And so we see these kind of more negative outcomes where authoritarian parenting is a little bit more in line with some of the collectivist kind of ideas, that it's not about you, it's about us. And so we don't see the same level of negative outcomes. Permissive parenting, these children tend to be impulsive, immature, and disobedient. They don't know what the rules are because they really never had any rules, which makes it hard to make good decisions, to develop maturity, and to know how to follow rules if you don't have any. And then the uninvolved parents, these children have the most negative outcomes again. They tend to have really low self-confidence and be really at risk for substance abuse. And again, in the very extreme cases of uninvolved parenting, this is where we're going to see cases of neglect is happening here. Okay, so let's move on to adolescence and adulthood. And in terms of social development, one of the major things that's going on in terms of social development in adolescence and adulthood is identity status. This is different than a sense of self. The sense of self was just kind of that you're an autonomous being, and that was kind of just recognizing that you are different than other people in infancy and childhood. Identity status is really kind of more who you say you are. So identity achievement is one of the statuses that we have here. And this really has a commitment to values and beliefs and goals, and this is following exploration. So you weren't sure what your political ideas were, so you went and figured it out and decided. You weren't sure what your religious values were, so you went and found out and you decided. And these could be other things besides religion and politics, but these values and beliefs and goals, and they weren't just something that was decided for you, that you went out and engaged in exploration to make these decisions. Where identity moratorium has all that exploration, but they never made a decision. Okay, so we have all that exploring, but we didn't decide, we didn't commit to values, beliefs, or goals. Okay, so it's kind of before you get to identity achievement. Identity achievement is clearly the most beneficial, where everybody kind of wants to be. But identity moratorium is kind of, we've had that exploration, there's not commitment, and we're kind of done. That doesn't mean that they can't eventually do identity achievement, but right now they're kind of in the status of identity moratorium, where we have this explanation, but we still don't really have any answers. Identity foreclosure is where we have commitment with that absence of exploration, okay? So we are this, but it's not necessarily because we've looked at our other options. It's just because this is who I've decided I am. So I have an example of a mother and a son who were fighting about politics, and they were voting for different candidates. Very topical this time of year and an election year. So they were voting for different candidates, and they were fighting back and forth about this, and eventually they, kind of broke apart and went to their separate corners, kind of unresolved. They, in a big huff, everybody ran off. And the daughter-in-law, the wife of the son, was talking to the mother, and she said, "Oh, well, he's just been thinking about this a lot, and I really think that he's, disillusioned with this, and that's why he's come to this conclusion based on this level of exploration, basically." And the mother said, "I didn't raise him to think for himself. I raised him to be fill in political party there." The idea that this mother wanted identity foreclosure. She wanted her son to just believe what she believed because she wanted that commitment. She didn't need that exploration. She wanted just that commitment to those same ideas, those same values. And we do see identity foreclosure as an identity status. This one's going to have some more problematic because it's not going to it's not high on critical thinking, okay? It's because hasn't been that level of exploration. So we'll see again, identity achievement is really a better one because we have engaged in those critical thinking skills before we came to conclusions about ourselves. Where identity foreclosure doesn't have that. It has that commitment, but that doesn't have that piece of exploration. And the final one is identity diffusion. And this is kind of apathetic, okay? You're not interested in figuring it out. You're not interested in kind of committing to anything either. You're just kind of undecided and okay with undecided and non-explored. And so we see kind of, again, they're differing on the level of commitment and the level of exploration. So identity achievement has a high level of commitment and a high level of exploration. Identity foreclosure has little to no exploration, but we've committed to these values. Low identity moratorium, we have high exploration, but no commitment. And when we have neither exploration nor commitment, we have identity diffusion. And we see that, again, identity achievement is going to kind of be the most beneficial of the four. We also see that as we go through adolescence, childhood, adolescence, adulthood, that are changes in relationships across development. So this graph shows kind of that time period. So we go from second grade to married with children. And what we see is really early on in development, that purple line, parents, are the most important kind of relationship. This, what they're measuring here, the dependent variable here is self-disclosure score. So who are you telling your secrets to, essentially? And we see that parents are getting the most of those in elementary school, followed by friends, and as you would expect, not much going on with the romantic partners really early on. But as we age and as we develop, those lines change. And friends, peers, as it was discussed earlier in the book, become a more influential role than parents. And again, a lot earlier than we sometimes think. So between 5th and 7th grade, we're really seeing big changes in who we're doing those self-disclosures to. We're seeing friends taking a more central role, and parents really starting to take back seat. As we develop and as adolescence and puberty takes a role and romantic partners become a really, important part of some people's lives, we see that those people actually kind of take over. Those romantic partners take over in terms of self-disclosure. Really starting in about college, but continuing through adulthood. They kind of are where we do our most of our secret telling and our disclosures about ourselves. We see that friends start to take a dip when we become married. That romantic partner kind of takes over some of those self-disclosure kind of responsibilities from the friends. But we see when couples have children that what we see is that parents start to play a bigger role. Okay, I need the wisdom of someone who's done this before, and parents get an uptick then. We still see romantic partners kind of taking the lead, but friends and parents are a lot closer together than they've been in a kind of a very long time. So again, this changes in social relationships is really reflective of what's going on, both psychologically and physically, and in terms of our kind of physical changes and relationship status. We also see that friendships across the lifespan really change. As we grow up, I really like this quote, as we grow up, we realize it's less important to have lots of friends and more important to have real ones. And we really see this as very reflective of the actual data we see in friendships. The younger we are, our friends aren't really based on levels of trust. When children are very young, it's who they like to play with, who likes the same things as them. And as they grow and they develop, those relationships become more and more trust-based. And the more trust-based a relationship is, the longer it's going to last. And so we see that the number of friends really goes down, but it's more important to have these kind of important relationships. A kind of new phenomenon that we talk about in terms of development, lifespan development, is emerging adulthood. So emerging adulthood is something that we're really seeing in modern cultures. And it really is this period of kind of late teens, early 20s, where we're kind of stretching out becoming an adult. Even now, at my stage in life, I saw something the other day. It was a meme on Facebook, and it was talking about, I need an adultier adult. Sometimes I don't feel like I'm the most adult of adults. I need someone who's adultier than me. And this is kind of indicative of that kind of emerging adulthood, that it's not something that we turn 18 and we're all of a sudden expected to be finished, okay? That we're expected to have all the responsibilities of every other adult. And I remember when I turned 18, I really kind of thought that I was supposed to be finished, and kind of had a little bit of an emotional breakdown on my birthday and cried on my mom's shoulder and say, I'm not ready to be an adult, because I was growing up in this modern culture where we really did have this emerging adulthood, okay? This much longer window between kind of physical adulthood, which happens with sexual maturity, and kind of the taking on of adult roles. And again, we've seen this, this is across our own culture, 1890 to 1995, so 100 years, kind of the difference, the expanding of this. We also see that emerging adulthood really has changed in terms of even throughout college. A lot of times people will go to college and then move back in with their parents after they graduate from college, or never have left their parents. And this is, again, all indicative of this change in how we see development, how we see adulthood, and who we expect to be the adultier adults. One thing that we talk about in terms of aging is cognitive decline, okay? So we say we're never done developing, and in some ways we see declines in adulthood, and in some ways we don't. The question is there really cognitive decline in adulthood? When we look at these sorts of things where it looks like there is a large amount of cognitive decline, as this graph shows, there was a study, the purple line was a study that looked at kind of 25-year-olds all the way up to intervals up to kind of 80s, 90s, and they found a big difference in verbal ability. And the conclusion was drawn that there's a cognitive decline in adulthood. The problem with that study is that study was done cross-sectionally. They took people that are 25-year-old now, and they compared them with people that are 88 now. And the problem with that is that the people that are 88 now had a very different kind of upbringing and very different experiences. They are a different cohort, a different group of people that had a different set of life experiences than the people that are 25 now. The people that are 25 now grew up with the internet. The people that are 25 now grew up with this kind of unfettered access to information, whereas the people that are 88 didn't. And so again, when we study this same kind of verbal ability scores, and we do it longitudinally, meaning we follow the same people when they're 25, 32, 39, all the way up to 88, we follow the same person, we don't see these cognitive declines. In fact, we see that we actually get better into middle age. That's kind of our peak. And there's a slight decline, but to still levels that are comparable, if not better, than when we were in our early 20s. So again, we really see that these differences are based on kind of cohort effects or the differences in generations. So the newer generation had better health and education than the previous one. And so it's really more reflective of these differences in these cohorts than it is reflective of actually decline in adulthood. And there's differences in the tests as well. And so they may not be tapping the same level of information that older adults are using. This is a longitudinal study that followed 5,000 participants between the ages of 22 and 70. And it investigated several different kinds of cognitive measures. Including the blue line, verbal ability, the red line, inductive reasoning, the orange line, verbal memory, the green line, spatial orientation, the yellow line, numeric ability, and the purple line, perceptual speed. And they have data spending 60 years on these 5,000 participants. And what they found was that 5 factors actually gained ability into middle adulthood, okay? And that included verbal ability, inductive reasoning, verbal memory, spatial orientation, and numeric ability as well. The only actual decline we saw was perceptual speed. So that is the purple line. That's the one that kind of just went kind of straight down. And that was really the only decline that was really, really evident, that was really seen. But what we see is that people in older adulthood have ways to make up for those differences in perceptual speed, so that their functioning is maintained and sometimes still improved. We see, however, that middle age is kind of the intellectual prime, and you see that a lot of times the most successful people are in this middle age, and some of that really is indicative of these gains in these cognitive functions. There are different kinds of intelligence that we really see differences in across the lifespan. So one of which is fluid intelligence, and fluid intelligence is based on those kind of information processing skills, okay? And that's the one that we really see the decline in. This is important for detecting relationships among stimuli, analytical speed, working memory. And again, this is the one that declines, okay? This is the one, the purple line from the previous slide. We really see this starting to decline in the 20s and drop steadily throughout adulthood, okay? So this is kind of an ongoing decline. What we see that compensates for these declines in fluid intelligence, however, is crystallized intelligence. These skills really focus on accumulated knowledge, so that's going to go up. Experience goes up, good judgment goes up, mastery of social conventions, all of these things are going to improve over time, right? And these are really valued by a person's cultures. And we see rises through middle and late adulthood with, again, peaks in the middle adult, but we don't really see any declines until 80s and probably 90s now. And what we really see is these improved areas of crystallized intelligence, these improvements, these gains in crystallized intelligence really compensate for any of those losses with fluid intelligence. So those crystallized kind of comes in and compensates for some of those declines in fluid intelligence. A really good example of this is T. Boone Pickens. If you're not familiar with T. Boone Pickens, he's from Texas, but he is a very successful businessman who has kind of, in the oil industry especially, and he's, not 45. He is definitely up there in age. And a researcher at my alma mater, UT Dallas, Denise Park, looks at changes in brain function. She works for the Center for Brain Health at the University of Texas at Dallas. And she had 350 participants between the ages of 20 and 89. And she also looked at T. Boone Pickens' brain. And she said that he was really ideal because he is more active than other adults. And what they found when they scanned his brain is that his brain scan actually looked like a younger adult. So here are some pictures. And these are his brain. And so the first test was living versus non-living. And they found that it was a good sign of health that the left hemisphere of T. Boone's brain provided most of the neurons working on the easy questions, whether it was cat or book, was living or non-living. With those harder decisions, zombie and unicorn, living or not living, those red patches in the second set of brains shows this extra blood flow. And this relies, again, on his left side of his brain, which is a well-organized brain response. The second test was judging the length of lines and a relative distance between lines and dots. That's that last set of brains there. It's a right brain question. And the most active spots are in yellow. Many seniors' brains line up all over. When this was done, he had just turned 80. And his brain looks more like he's 55. The last test looked at viewing images of faces and places, and again, his brain was more indicative of a younger brain. The kind of take-home message from this is an 80-year-old man whose brain function looks like that of a 55-year-old. The kind of use it or lose it idea is really real, and it's not just about muscles. It's about cognitive function as well. When we really see declines in cognitive function, we really see that they are attributed to not using those skills, not using those cognitive skills. And so we see a lot of times people who retire and don't take up some sort of active lifestyle, including hobbies and other activities. We really do sometimes see declines in these individuals. My dad says he's never going to retire. He does consulting with he does consulting. It doesn't really matter with what. He really enjoys what he does, and he does it from his house. He does it from home, and so he can just kind of take the jobs as he continues to age. He can kind of take the jobs that he wants and turn down the jobs that he doesn't want. He turned 70 this year, and he's still very engaged. He's still using those cognitive functions, and so you really haven't seen those kinds of declines in cognition because he continues to use them, and we really do see that anecdote is really reflected in the literature as well, that people like T. Boone, people like my dad, who really are continuing to engage in these cognitive functions, in these social interactions, we really do not see these same level of declines. So this kind of concludes our lifespan development lecture series. Again, the idea is that we're kind of always a work in progress, that we never stop changing or developing anytime between conception and death. Now that we're done, I want you to take the timeline that you created before our first lecture on development, and I want you to go back and see if there's anything that you would change about those hypothesized differences. I want you to go back and look at that and see, now that you understand more about development, do you see that anything actually played a bigger role in your timeline up until this point? And do you think that anything, these hypothesized things that you think in the future would change you, do you see any differences in those? So really use that timeline as a way to reflect on the content that we've talked about, both in class and online, so that you can kind of see the role that, that the development has played in your own life. Thanks, and see you in class.